A chill wind blows across Eastern Europe. Russia's recent actions in Ukraine have shattered the fragile peace that followed the Cold War. The annexation of Crimea and the ongoing conflict in the Donbas region are stark reminders of the Kremlin's willingness to use force to achieve its geopolitical objectives. The world watches with bated breath, wondering if this is the beginning of a new era of confrontation. Russia's aggression threatens the international rules-based order that has underpinned global security for decades. The principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful resolution of disputes are all under attack. The West, led by the United States and its NATO allies, faces a critical test of its resolve and credibility. Failure to deter further Russian aggression could have dire consequences, not only for Ukraine but for the entire European security architecture. The specter of a wider conflict, one that could potentially draw in NATO and Russia directly, looms large. This is not simply a regional conflict, it is a global crisis with the potential to reshape the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. To understand Russia's actions today, we must look back at its past. Russia has a long and troubled history of expansionism and territorial ambition. From the Tsars to the Soviets, Russian leaders have consistently sought to expand their country's borders and influence. This historical baggage weighs heavily on the present. Under Vladimir Putin, Russia has sought to reclaim its lost empire and reassert itself as a major power on the world stage. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a traumatic experience for many Russians, leaving them feeling humiliated and dispossessed. Putin has skillfully exploited this sense of grievance, using it to rally support for his authoritarian rule and his aggressive foreign policy. Ukraine, with its deep historical and cultural ties to Russia, has become the primary target of Putin's revanchist ambitions. Putin has repeatedly denied Ukraine's right to exist as an independent state, claiming that it is an artificial construct of the West. He has sought to undermine Ukrainian sovereignty through a combination of military pressure, economic coercion, and political subversion. The annexation of Crimea was not an impulsive act. It was a carefully planned and executed operation designed to achieve multiple strategic objectives for Russia. By seizing control of Crimea, Russia gained control of the strategically important Sevastopol naval base, home to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. This gave Russia a dominant position in the Black Sea, projecting power into the Mediterranean and beyond. The operation was also a propaganda coup for Putin, boosting his domestic popularity and demonstrating Russia's resurgent military might. The swift and bloodless takeover of Crimea, carried out with the support of a significant portion of the local population, played into Putin's narrative of Russia as a protector of Russian speakers and a defender of its historical sphere of influence. The international community was caught off guard by the speed and audacity of the Crimean annexation. Western governments condemned the move and imposed sanctions on Russia, but these measures proved largely ineffective in deterring further Russian aggression. The ease with which Russia achieved its objectives in Crimea emboldened Putin to believe that he could act with impunity elsewhere. Following the annexation of Crimea, Russia turned its attention to the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine, where a pro-Russian separatist movement had been simmering for years. Exploiting existing tensions between the Russian-speaking population in the east and the Ukrainian government in Kyiv, Russia provided military support, training, and equipment to the separatists. This support enabled the separatists to launch a full-scale armed rebellion against the Ukrainian government. The conflict quickly escalated into a bloody proxy war, with Russia and Ukraine engaged in a deadly dance of denials and accusations. Thousands of civilians and soldiers have been killed in the fighting, and millions have been displaced from their homes. Russia has consistently denied its direct involvement in the conflict, claiming that the separatists are fighting for their own self-determination. However, overwhelming evidence suggests that Russia has provided the separatists with advanced weaponry, including tanks, artillery, and anti-aircraft systems. The conflict in the Donbas has created a frozen conflict zone in the heart of Europe. While the immediate focus of Russia's aggression has been on Ukraine, it is clear that Putin has his sights set on a much larger prize: the undermining of the entire post-Cold War security order in Europe. Ukraine is merely a pawn in this larger game, a testing ground for Russia's revanchist ambitions and its willingness to challenge the West. By destabilizing Ukraine, Russia seeks to prevent it from ever joining NATO or the European Union. Moscow views the expansion of these organizations as a direct threat to its own security and influence. A stable, democratic, and prosperous Ukraine integrated into Western institutions would be a powerful symbol of Russia's declining influence and a potential model for other former Soviet republics to emulate. Putin's ultimate goal is to create a sphere of influence in its near abroad, a buffer zone of weak and dependent states that would serve as a bulwark against what it perceives as Western encroachment. Russia's leverage over Europe extends beyond military might. As a major energy supplier, particularly of natural gas, Russia wields significant economic and political influence over many European countries. This dependence on Russian energy has created vulnerabilities that Moscow has not hesitated to exploit, particularly in the context of the Ukraine crisis. Russia has a history of using energy as a political weapon, cutting off gas supplies to Ukraine and other European countries during previous disputes. This tactic has raised concerns about Europe's energy security and its reliance on a single supplier with a history of using energy for political leverage. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a controversial project designed to double the capacity of natural gas flowing directly from Russia to Germany, has further exacerbated these concerns. Despite criticism from the United States and some European countries, Germany and other European nations heavily reliant on Russian energy have been hesitant to take concrete steps to reduce their dependence. This dependence has limited the West's ability to impose truly crippling sanctions on Russia, as European economies are deeply intertwined with Russia's energy sector. The West's response to Russia's aggression in Ukraine has been marked by a combination of condemnation, sanctions, and military support for Ukraine. However, the response has also been hampered by divisions within NATO, with some member states hesitant to risk a direct confrontation with Russia. The United States has been the most vocal critic of Russia's actions, providing Ukraine with billions of dollars in military and financial assistance. However, the U.S. has ruled out direct military intervention in the conflict, fearing an escalation that could lead to a wider war between NATO and Russia. European nations have been more divided in their response. Some, like Poland and the Baltic states, have taken a hard line against Russia, calling for increased military spending and a more robust NATO presence in Eastern Europe. Others, like Germany and France, have been more cautious, advocating for a combination of dialogue and sanctions while remaining wary of provoking Russia further. NATO's dilemma: balancing deterrence and escalation. NATO faces an unenviable dilemma in its response to Russia's aggression. On the one hand, the alliance must demonstrate its unwavering commitment to the defense of its members, particularly those on the front lines of Russia's aggression. Failure to do so would embolden Putin further and could lead to further aggression against NATO members. On the other hand, NATO must avoid any actions that could be perceived by Russia as provocative or escalatory, potentially leading to a wider conflict. This delicate balancing act requires careful diplomacy, military prudence, and a united front among NATO members. The alliance has responded to the crisis by increasing its military presence in Eastern Europe, deploying troops and equipment to Poland, the Baltic states, and other NATO members bordering Russia. NATO has also conducted military exercises in the region, demonstrating its readiness to defend its members. The global implications: a world on edge. The crisis in Ukraine has reverberated far beyond the borders of Eastern Europe. It has raised tensions between Russia and the West to levels not seen since the Cold War, creating a climate of mistrust and hostility that has spilled over into other areas of international relations. The crisis has also emboldened other authoritarian regimes around the world, who see Russia's willingness to challenge the West as a sign of weakness and indecision. China, in particular, has watched the events in Ukraine closely, drawing lessons for its own ambitions in the South China Sea and beyond. The crisis has also highlighted the limitations of the international community's ability to respond effectively to acts of aggression by major powers. The specter of the bear, living with a resurgent Russia. The crisis in Ukraine has forced the West to confront an uncomfortable truth. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, is a revanchist power intent on revising the post-Cold War order and reclaiming its lost sphere of influence. This reality has profound implications for Western policy towards Russia and for the future of European security. Containment, the strategy that successfully contained Soviet expansionism during the Cold War, is no longer a viable option in the interconnected and interdependent world of the 21st century. Russia is deeply integrated into the global economy, and its nuclear arsenal makes direct military confrontation unthinkable. Instead, the West must adopt a more nuanced and multifaceted strategy that combines elements of deterrence, containment, and engagement. This strategy must be based on a clear-eyed assessment of Russia's strengths and weaknesses, as well as a realistic understanding of Western interests and priorities. Conclusion: navigating the uncertain future. The crisis in Ukraine is a tragedy for the people of Ukraine, a challenge for the West, and a defining moment for the international order. The outcome of this crisis will have profound implications for the future of Europe and the world. The West faces a stark choice: appease Russia's appetite for territorial expansion and accept a new Iron Curtain descending across Europe, or stand firm and risk a wider conflict with potentially catastrophic consequences. There are no easy answers, and the stakes could not be higher. The West must navigate this treacherous terrain with wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the principles of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law.